Okay. So let us do this now.
Welcome to Shareholders of a Better World, brought to you by Tbli.group. At Tbli.group, we have an established reputation as an organization dedicated to building the ecosystem of global sustainability and impact investing. We're doing this through educating, advising, and facilitating transactions in global sustainability and impact business, as well as capital solutions for private companies, family offices, and fund groups. For nearly 25 years, Tbli.group has created a vertically integrated ecosystem of education to action through Tbli conferences and Tbli consulting. More about our company can be found at Tbli.group.com. This webinar is brought to you by Tbli Foundation, which hosts educational learning experiences dedicated to a better planet. Through the foundation, we build sustainable communities by sharing the people and the experiences making a difference to so many of our lives around the world. Our weekly podcasts bring impact thought leaders that are doing and not only chatting. Now let me introduce my guest today.
Thank you very, very much. Thank you all for joining us today. Let's do this. Okay. All right. And okay, Jim, if you can come back, I can make a short introduction to you. That's perfect. Oh, there we go. All right, you're back. Thank you. So thank you so much for taking the time and doing this. For those, I would prefer that you explain a bit about, you're like a Swiss Army knife about everything. So you're kind of the ultimate Renaissance man. But if you could briefly tell the audience that is not familiar with you and also Game B, what are you trying to achieve? And then we can get into how we can all help you achieve that. So again, thank you so much for doing this. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, I put together a short little presentation about Game B, which is a project myself, and I would say now something like 30,000 people have been working on since 2013. And it's essentially a thesis on where our society ought to go. Very brief background on me. I was a business dude from 1975 until I retired in 2001. Started several companies, was a C-level executive at a major multinational, public company CEO, made enough money and said, enough. And then reinvented myself as a complexity scientist at the Santa Fe Institute. I eventually ended up as chairman of the Santa Fe Institute. It's the leading center in the world for complexity science. And then subsequently, I have been working since I retired from that in 2012. I've been working on seriously applying complexity science and what I learned in the business world to how we can build a better, actually a survivable world for ourselves and most importantly, for our descendants. The fact that I've 3.5 years ago became a grandfather has added even more saliency to my view of the need to do this and my haste to try to get it done. So that's a little preamble about me. And whenever you give me the word, Robert, I can hop in and give you some thoughts on what I mean by game B and game A.
That'd be fine. I mean, if I think you can share the screen if you want to show something.
Truthfully, I hate PowerPoints, and and while while I actually structured my thinking using PowerPoints, I am not going to actually
Okay.
show PowerPoints. I'm just going to give a little talk.
Okay.
And
Perfect.
then I aim to do it in half the time or less to leave lots of time for questions.
Okay, that would be great. And also, I admire you because you're one of the few people that curses more than I do on on podcasts and webinars.
Yes, indeed. I'm definitely a great believer in the F word. In fact, for all you people, I'm spreading some memetics out there, which is it's so much fun to cuss on social media, but these days they'll down-regulate your post a little bit if you do. So I've now been starting to use and encourage others to use PHUQUE. People immediately get it, and it works with the ER ending, the ING ending, and the ED ending. So when you want to say fuck on social media, do it PHUQUE. You heard that here from Jim Rutt. All right. Well, first, let me start. When Robert reached out to me with what, to my mind, seemed like a fairly bland institutional proposal. Hey, come give a little talk to our ESG group. Here's my direct response, which was I'd say something like ESG is at best greenwashing and at worst a scam. Most impact investing is less relevant than rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic. However, if you really wanted to move us from dying game A to game B, you could. And to his credit, Robert said, "Oh yeah, we know who you are. We'd love to have you come and tell your stuff." And so I said, "Well, on that condition, I'll do it." A thought to start us thinking. This is from David Graeber, very interesting thinker. Unfortunately, recently died at a relatively young age. From his book "Bullshit Jobs." Every day we wake up and collectively make a world together. But which of us, left to our own devices, would ever decide they wanted to make a world like this one? Keep that in mind as we move through this. And indeed, I call this the gateway insight, that none of our current socio-political, economic, etc. operating system was brought down from Mount Sinai by Moses. We built it. We humans, we can change it. We own the moral responsibility for the nature of our society. Those of us, particularly those of us who've been fortunate in life, have an obligation to put our shoulder to the wheel and our pocketbooks into action to help create the kind of world we actually want, not just take the one that has emerged. So as I told Robert, what I wanted to title my talk today, kind of curiously perhaps, was Real Wealth. Like many of us, when we think of wealth, particularly if we're thinking about wealth with our investor hats on, we are drawn to things like pointers to wealth, like money, stocks and bonds, titles to real estate, minority interests and limited partnerships, aggregations of those, funds of funds, right? Abstractions upon extractions, but those aren't real wealth. The next closer to some real wealth are things like factories, farmlands, trucks, buildings, etc. And as we know, those of us who read our history, the abstract pointers have been eliminated or expropriated from time to time as societies make radical changes in their social operating system. If you think you're preserving wealth for yourself and your generations and your clients via dealing in abstractions, well, that'll work most of the time. But read the statistics of the fat-tailed risk distribution, and you'll know that there are certainly times when those pointers just disappear, and real wealth is not about that. And some examples: in 1922, there was hyperinflation in Germany, Austria, and Hungary. The monetary system got wiped, inflated. Famous pictures, people with wheelbarrows full of million mark notes to buy a loaf of bread. The economy ground to a halt as the signaling system broke down. Yes, the money is a signaling system. That's all that it is. But the German government first, and then soon thereafter Austria and Hungary, killed the old monetary system, wiped out everybody's bank account, and restarted a new system on a sound basis. And within a week, the system started to stitch itself together, and the economy started accelerating again. And within less than a year, all the ground lost in hyperinflation was lost. So that strikes me as a real world example that we can make some pretty radical changes in these abstractions and these signaling modalities without harming our underlying wealth. But even the tangible aspects of wealth, like factories, farmlands, trucks, etc., aren't really the true wealth. Consider Germany and Japan, where most of their industrial capacity was destroyed in World War II. Within 20 years, they'd rebuilt it and more, and were both considered huge economic challengers to the rest of the world. How did they do that? Well, it was from their people and their culture. And that is what I would argue is the basis of true wealth, who we are as people and how we choose to live. So keep that in mind as we move forward here. So what is the state of our culture and our people today? I'm going to speak specifically of America, where I live and that I'm most familiar with, but it applies to a greater or lesser degree across most of the first world. And I would suggest that it is not good. We see a collapse of trust in our institutions, mental health crisis, especially amongst the young. Look at those statistics, it's staggering. Crash in fertility rates. When people aren't even reproducing, they've lost faith in the future. And insanity in our politics and in our public discourse. I'm an old dude. When I was 65, in 1965, I was 12 years old. At that time, less than half of American adults, were high school graduates. My parents fit that bill exactly. My father was a high school dropout. My mother had graduated from high school. And yet the politics at that time were sort of sensible, right? The discourse was reasonable. People read the newspapers, some of the great things of American change happened then, the civil rights movement, interstate highway system, Project Apollo. Okay, so here were people, half of them high school graduates, and yet our public governance and public discourse was good. My father read the newspaper every day, cover to cover, right? Now we're at 90% high school grads and 30-some% are four-year university grads, yet we live in a world of crazy conspiracy theories and ass clowns running for president, right? But who the hell would have ordered up Donald Trump, Joe Biden, and Robert F. Kennedy Jr.? And that's not to even consider the even zanier stuff, QAnon, flat earthers, moon landing conspiracy theories, go on and on. Such a world is literally insane. And then on top of it all, what we have in the Game B world, adjacent spaces, what we call the meta crisis, which is the seeming total pervasive inability to deal with any of these issues. We talk, but nothing ever happens. So what are the root causes of all this? We suggest in the Game B world that we are in very late stage Game A, where Game A is failing, and that Game A will fail, which we'll talk about a little bit how and why. And unfortunately, there are some attractors that already exist. This is a complexity science term that think of society as like a salad bowl, the possibilities of our society, and where we are at any given instant is the marble rolling around in the salad bowl. So, we invent the internet, so the marble moves this way. Okay, we start to have a gas shortage, so the marble moves over here, etc. But the reality is, historically, now and then, cataclysms occur and marbles fly out of their salad bowls and they land somewhere else. And our thesis is the Game A salad bowl game is coming to an end of the century, probably at the latest, could be earlier. Where will it land? Well, unfortunately, there are some bad attractors. There are other salad bowls out there waiting to attract this marble. Some of the obvious ones are neo-dark ages in the form of theocracies of one sort or another, whether they're Islamic theocracies, Christian crackpot fundamentalists, whatever you can name it. That's a known historical pattern. Theocracies that bring progress and freedom to a halt. Neo-fascism. We certainly see that. China's a good example of literally fascism. They call themselves communists, but you go down the checklist of what a fascist dictatorship looks like, they hit every bill. Neo-feudalism. I suspect that's a real risk here in America. People like Mark Andreessen and Peter Thiel. Their vision, what they call libertarianism, I would call neo-feudalism, right? Read Mark Andreessen's manifesto. I see feudalism right through that. And then, of course, the last one is disorder, collapse of society. It's happened before, the fall of Rome in the West. And the one that we know less about, but appears to have been much more catastrophic, was the late Bronze Age collapse around 1200 BC, where Greece, which was even then one of the leading centers of the world, literally lost literacy for 400 years. Imagine that. Lost literacy. Could happen to us. And so at the highest level, our perspective is that game B is creating a new salad bowl for the marble to fall in, or more properly to run across the ridge into this adjacent salad bowl. And our job is to create this catcher for when game A reaches its end of job. So a little bit about the history of game A, at least in my definition. I like to think about it starting around 1700 in southern England and Amsterdam regions of Netherlands. And it was it's a joining together of three things: science, which actually came into being in the 17th century. People like Newton is probably the most famous one, but there were many others. Democracy is exemplified by the Glorious Revolution of 1688 in England and the quasi-democratic systems of the Amsterdam region and others in the Netherlands, and financialized capitalism exemplified by the founding of the Bank of England in 1694 and the Bank of Amsterdam just a little bit earlier. And while we now say game A is a risk to us all, initially it was a good thing, a great thing, one of the best things that ever happened to humanity. It overthrew feudalism, it empowered the people, it ended slavery, emancipated women, led us to a soaring lifespan. In 1700, half of the children were dead by the time they were 10. Each woman had a 1% chance of dying with each birth, and most had 6 or 7 births. So every woman had a 6, 7, 8% chance of dying in childbirth. Doesn't all that sound good? Yeah, it was great. But unfortunately, game A evolved with no brakes, and it's running us over a cliff. And this is hugely important to keep in mind about why what this wonderful thing was has now become something that could easily kill us. In 1700, there were only 600 million humans, each consuming about 1/20th per capita the average energetic and material inputs that the average human, including sub-Saharan Africa and everywhere else, consumes today. Now we have 8 billion humans. We have 12 times the population, each consuming 20x more, for a total of 240x the impact on our world. 1700, humans couldn't hurt the world. Not enough of us, we weren't powerful enough. But since 1980 or so, we have been running up against our planetary limits. And I'm not going to go through the usual list of all the things that are wrong with the world. Myself and a co-author are actually writing a book on the Game B book, we call it. And we have decided early on, I think it's a brilliant move, my co-author, give her credit for it. She said, we're going to not put all that stuff in, but instead we're going to create a website called litanyofshit.com. And we actually have the domain name, but we haven't populated it yet. But soon you'll be able to go to litanyofshit.com, be a crowd-sourced wiki of every horrible thing about the current world. But I'm just going to list 2, which to my mind are the most horrifying. Of all mammalian biomass on the planet Earth, and I rechecked this this morning to make sure that this included mice and shrews and all that stuff. The answer is yes. 96% of all mammalian biomass on Earth is humans, our pets, and our livestock. 96%. 4% are free-living animals. Of birds, at least 70%, some people say 80%, is our poultry. What the hell kind of way of treating our natural world is that? Horrifying. And keep in mind, that's with 16% of the world's population living at the so-called high income threshold, which ain't all that high. It's $50 a day, as defined by the OECD, whatever the hell it is. And so that's 16% of the people. 8 billion people living at American, Canadian, and Australian levels of intensity. Game over. or at best, I forget who it was, one of the interesting writers said, yeah, maybe we could do it, but it would be a world of concrete and shit, and that's all it would be. And so we decided, we concluded 10 years ago that we need a new game that can be something that can survive into the future. And so we'll talk about a little bit about that. But right before we do that, let's talk a little bit about sort of where we are with Game A. We now describe it as late stage, hyper financialized capitalism that's driven by a single inner loop, money on money return, and most of that measured on a relatively short-term basis, 3 years or less. I sometimes call this the tyranny of the IRR. Further, our culture itself, the things we talked about earlier, is manufactured by the scientifically informed persuasion to be what it is, a consumptive, banal, insane consumer culture. As a data point, back in 2019, I was doing some research for a paper, and I looked at the job postings that Facebook had up at the time and searched them. 700 of the job postings for Facebook in 2019 had the word psychology in the post somewhere. You can be damn sure it wasn't, how to improve human well-being by making Facebook better for humanity. It was how to hook people to sell more ads. You can be damn sure of that. And so the result is we have a system of no brakes, seemingly going over the cliff. So one other alternative besides Game B, we call the Davos man solution. Basically, to tell the people of the advanced world, less, less, less. Eat bugs and you'll be happy. I can tell you that's not going to work. Why would it? Who the hell's going to take less, less, less with nothing in return? Metacrisis and denial is what's going to happen in the election of reactionary quasi-fascists, as we're seeing growing in political power around the first world. Even countries like Italy and France and Germany are seeing ever-growing numbers, and now within striking distance of power. And of course, we had our own ass clown first class in the United States who might be returning because the people aren't going to take it. And Davos man is going to get, hauled off to the guillotine, would be my suggestion if he keeps up with this crap. The Game B alternative is one we do believe that people will be open to once they understand it, which is less material inputs, but more, much more in terms of human well-being, right? In terms of living and how we think and how we be and how we are in the world and how we feel, right? Roughly speaking, for Americans, Canadians, and Australians, the most egregious, you can assume that Europeans are about 1/3 less intense than those three. We figure that we should, by 2080, have 3x less inputs per capita, but just hand wavy, of course, 3 times more well-being, right? This is a trade that makes sense. Live in a better world that's better for you and your children and how you feel and how you are day to day, and you don't need as much inputs. To give an example, our current society runs at around 11,000 kilowatts. That means for every man, woman, and child in the United States, Canada, and Australia, we are burning the equivalent of, what would that be, about 110 100-watt light bulbs continuously. That's a lot of power, and that's to do our energy consumption, but it's also to make our stuff, clean our clothes, etc. Some calculations of some people who've done some serious thinking about this say that realistically we could build a carbon-free energy domain of about 4 kilowatts for everybody on Earth, for all 8 billion people, maybe 10 billion by then. To give a sense of what a 4 kilowatt society is, it's not terrible. 4 kilowatt society is Portugal, and Portugal has not optimized itself around being a 4,000 watt society. And we like to say that games are only interesting when they have rules, right? And so we're imagining it's going to be a lot of fun for humanity to figure out how to live extremely well on 4,000 kilowatts. Certainly not impossible. One of the things we'd like to suggest is an emphasis of quality rather than quantity. One of our leading examples of the utter insanity of late stage Game A is a horrific trend called fast fashion, where people buy clothes, wear them 3 times, and throw them away, or whatever the hell they do with them. I don't know. I still wear the same old stuff I've always worn. But instead, imagine a well-made, long-lasting shirt that you own and have owned, but every week or maybe every month, your auntie adds some embroidery to it, right? And you provide her with a needle and thread and a bushel of corn or something. And in return, she spends 45 minutes adding yet another little cool flower or symbol or Greek letter or scientific formula to your shirt. The shirt becomes truly rich in quality and aesthetics and is now tied to your aunt, and your aunt and you are now tied to your community, to everybody who looks and admires this shirt. And so what is a greater form of wealth? You know, cycling through 200 items of clothing per year in fast fashion, or having this beautiful, wonderful shirt that you and your auntie have grown together for 10 years. I'm going to argue it's the second. And how do we do this? You know, we also believe that increasing returns to scale around urbanism have been another part of what's gone wrong with our society. One of our Santa Fe Institute scholars, probably our most famous guy named Jeffrey West, wrote a book called Scale. And he and Louis Betancourt have popularized the idea that one of the reasons cities have just exploded and taken over the world is that they do indeed outproduce lower density areas at about a 15% rate for every doubling in size. However, their research also shows not only do they improve seemingly good things like patents, musical compositions, personal income, etc., but they also, at also 15% increase per doubling, the bad things, crime, disease, and mental health. And our move here is to take advantage of the technologies we have, and we are not hippies in mud huts. You know, we do not believe that we should be giving up the good things that Game A has created for us as our endowment. We believe that we can get the good parts of super scale and lose most of the bad parts by, instead of living in crazed amalgamations like New York City, living in healthy mesoscale communities of around the Dunbar number, which is classically Robin Dunbar. We did a great episode with him on my podcast, 150 people, 100 to 300, we say, and build our society up from that scale. You know, and live like most humans have lived for most of human history. In fact, up till 1870, most people did live in communities of 100 to 300 people, and they got their sustenance from that network of people. So long as the network was intact, nobody starved, nobody was homeless. You know, somebody would bring you your chicken soup when you're sick because they were your friend, not because you were paying them to do so. Starting around 1870 at an accelerating rate since, these organic communities of care have been replaced by 2 sterile institutions. One is the market, right? You know, I pay somebody to bring me chicken soup, or I order it from Amazon, or the government. It gives me a check, right? Neither of those are embedded in high-dimensional live human space. And they don't result, or increasingly are not resulting, in happy families, rich, real relationships with our children, grandchildren, our nieces and nephews, and nor are we creating people of good character and good values. And we are, even though we're living in the richest society in the world, where the welfare mother is richer than Louis XIV, we've nonetheless managed to cultivate insecurity. You know, nobody in the West should ever feel being homeless. They should always be homed, always be part of a community. They should never be fundamentally materially insecure. In these mesoscale communities, the mentally retarded kid hauled water for the blacksmith, and the mentally ill person lived in their aunt's attic, right? There was room for everybody, irrespective of their, you know, biological, sociological, or sociological endowments. And we need to return to that, right? And in our Game B model, we imagine we call them membranes. We build membranes at various scales. And let's start with the bottom, a community of 150 people approximately, and it establishes some accords. This is how we're going to live. And oh, by the way, it does business and it lives in a realistic economic world through the membranes. It does imports and exports. So i.e. has to actually have traction in the real game A world, at least for a while. Find things that it can sell to game A, but also to other parts of game B, sufficient to import the things that it needs. Game B is not going to be making Intel computer chips anytime soon. So we have to be realistic about this, right? And our membranes can nest. Give an example. Let's suppose there's 10 first level membranes, we call them proto-Bs, in the Shenandoah Valley of Virginia. And some of them are involved in agriculture, others are involved in tech, and others involved in making furniture, et cetera. Let's imagine the three of them that are mostly involved in agriculture form a higher level membrane to be an agricultural services co-op for them, to buy their agricultural inputs like tractors and fertilizer and seed, et cetera, and to help market their products and provide cold storage for their produce, et cetera. The membrane, the lower level membranes join together to create the upper level membrane, which creates a commons, which are these elements that I just described. And the upper level membrane itself has its own accords about how it wants to live, its norms, virtues, and values. And for instance, it could be an organic only membrane where it's only going to deal in organic produce, or it could be one that's not. It'd be up to the members to decide. Another example, and this is where the higher level membranes overlap each other. The Shenandoah River runs through this area, and there could be the membrane for the Shenandoah River preservation. So the commons in this case is the river itself, and all proto-Bs that are within X miles of that river within the watershed would collectively manage that commons, right? So we have the collective action problem that we have to solve, and the exact mechanisms for governance are to be determined by that membrane itself. And this is, again, part of the beauty of game B, and I think what distinguishes our thought from most other social change theories. We are certainly not utopian or top-down. One of our highest and most important values we call coherent pluralism. Very small number of top-level values. We must live within our planetary limits. We must all pledge to live on a 4 kilowatt basis. But beyond that, live how you want. You want to be an organic farm? Great. Don't want to be an organic farm? Great. Want to forbid abortion? Great. You want to require abortion? Great. And tolerate your neighbor, by the way. And we see this as an incredibly interesting way to build a society emergently from the bottom, creating higher and higher level membranes that nest in strange ways, not necessarily just hierarchically, but all within an outer membrane of a very small number of formative rules. One of the things we've learned from complexity science is the way the real universe works is just like that. We have a small number of fundamental particles. We have 4 forces. Those things join up to produce 92 elements. In biology, we operate on 20 amino acids, actually only 16 of them. And from these relatively small number of ingredients, there's amazing numbers of degrees of freedom, and our wonderful world has emerged from those. And we think about applying those same considerations to the game B, socio-political economic operating system, that it's as only as constrained as absolutely necessary, and has lots of room for human well-being to find itself in its own way, right? And we think that's hugely important and a radical change from how most political social operating systems have operated. One of those top-level concerns, though, and which will inherit down to all game B entities, is what we call omni-consideration. Every consideration made on, let's say, an investment or a thing must be considered not just in economic terms, but in other terms. A very simple-minded example that we've come up with for the book is, imagine if, let's use the Shenandoah River example. The wildlife biologists tell us that we can harvest 100,000 pounds of trout from the river every year sustainably. So we generate a new currency called Shenandoah River Trout currency. And everybody who lives in the watershed gets their fractional piece. And guess what? There's going to be lots of people that don't like river trout. And they can automatically have a checkbox that says, I want my river trout to be automatically routed to the AI trading system where people can buy and sell Shenandoah River trout tokens. And that can be done on an automated basis as well. I never eat beef, so my beef limit for for biological sustainable beef, grass-fed beef limit, I've already instructed the AI traders to trade that for fish for me. And so this is Econ 101, right? And you'll reach an equilibrium state, and people will be the traders will be trading beef for trout and trout for beef, and both for potatoes, etc. And if you want to buy Shenandoah River trout, punchline, you'll need not only the equivalent of fungible money, but you'll also need a Shenandoah River trout token as a way for the system itself to constrain the overuse of the ecosystem. And the watershed itself will manage that. It will assess what the sustainable limit is, and it will bring into being the Shenandoah River trout. So imagine that, a token. So imagine that on a worldwide basis as the mechanism by which decisions are made. And that's an example of omni consideration. And in this world, we're beginning to think that the function of investors is going to be much more like a secular priest than it is like a self-optimizer, seeing how big you can grow your stack of coins, right? And these secular priests, I actually posted this on Twitter a couple of days ago, just thought experiment. Maybe they are like Catholic priests. They take a vow of poverty and celibacy, and they are trained as Catholic priests are very well-educated people in general, and they learn how to make economically knowledgeable and not stupid investments, which is better than many investors are. We know that how many investors are basically noise investors, but they're also highly schooled on what omni consideration means. And we don't want top-down state socialism. Fuck that, right? That's the worst outcome. So imagine every Dunbar level community, every proto-B has or subscribes to a secular investment priest who handles the investment of their economic surplus, but does so in a non-self-serving way for the good of humanity and applying omni consideration. What an interesting thought, right? So how can you help? You rich fuckers, right? And oh, by the way, I'm one too, but I will say I give away far more than I spend every year, and I would encourage other people to make that pledge as well. Game B is now ready to build membranes. There are 20 groups looking to build on-the-ground communities. And if there were resources available, there would be many more. So I'm going to suggest to you, you put aside 2% of your capital for positive but low return, truly ethical investments in Game B communities and enterprises. And again, Game B is not hippies and mud huts. We're going to do things that are economically rational while we build this new world. And we have quite specific ideas how we can provide Game A investors a positive, though low return, to provide capital into building Game B. I'd also suggest, because startups are always difficult, particularly socioeconomic ones, put aside 1% of your capital to philanthropically bootstrap the initial growth curve for Game B. We get to 1 million people actively living Game B, it should be self-sustaining, but it's going to take some bootstrap capital to get there. And so as not to be sucked back into the Game A money-on-money return thing as an overpowering and crushing attractor, we're going to need some philanthropic money to get this thing going, and particularly to grow as fast as we are. And we believe that, and this is, we believe, but no one's going to have to believe. That's very important. We're going to show, not tell, Game B. Get 1 million people living Game B, or even 25,000. We'll have Airbnbs at our communities. People can come and see. And then they can go back to their shit-ass job of working in the cubicle all fucking day and see how they like that. And we believe that will produce an osmotic pressure that will have more people wanting to come into Game B than we can handle, which is going to then provide opportunities to create these investment vehicles for low but ethical, low but positive return, truly ethical investments to grow Game B out. And oh, by the way, periodic crises will work for us. When things suck more in Game A, that gives us more osmotic pressure to come in. And we will not be subject to those fluctuations. We're going to be building our systems as part of omni consideration to be metastable. And our goal is, combine all these together, and this also comes from complexity theory, that if we can grow 25% a year, which is not much for a startup, actually, pretty damn hard for late stage venture, but we think we can grow for 25% for quite a long while, probably faster than that initially. We can reach a tipping point in our society, and our complex systems work indicates that's somewhere in the 3 to 15% range of the population of some entity. Is it a US state? Is it a country the size of Ireland? Hard to say. And at that point, when people are living a life they don't actually enjoy, it's been shown again and again. Think of the conversion of the Roman Empire to Christianity, which did not happen due to Constantine, contrary to popular beliefs, because Christianity had grown to be 30 or 40% of the population. Actually, it was 30, maybe 25% of the population. The system can actually convert, and we can fall into this new and better salad bowl that's truly sustainable for everybody on Earth. We'll be consuming less, but we'll be enjoying life more. So that's a very quick, hand-wavy description of the mission that myself and my fellow travelers are upon. And we'd love to invite you to help build a world of true wealth for us and our descendants.
Thank you. It's always a joy listening to you. It's like taking a drink from a fire hose on full blast. What do you anticipate if Game B reaches, whether it's 25,000 or 1 million? What is that transition period from Game A to Game B? How long is that? Is it feasible? What's going to happen with all of the 7 times more wealth than there is global GDP, who are not going to be too crazy about giving up any of their money for something that they're not getting their 10x? So how do you see that transition?
A very good question. And like any complex systems trajectory, all you can do is guess. Because I would say, started out life as a 12-year-old nerd, naive Newtonian, believing that if I knew the position of every particle and its velocity, I could predict all of history, right? Well, guess what? That's wrong. The thing about learning about complexity, it makes you extremely humble about what you can say about the future, which is only a little bit. To your question about how long it will take, we talk about 2 ways that we could get to Game B. One is the long road, and one's the short road. The long road is by compound growth at 25% for 60 years. So figure 2085, we'll get there if we can keep that up, right? Okay. And we can do it a bit at a time with no cataclysms. And eventually people will give up their money due to social opprobrium. People ask me, how do you know we're in Game B? And we talk about the fact that there are currents within any Game B membrane, which exemplify our way of living, our ethos, our norms, our virtues, and our values. So someone drives up to a Game B community in a Porsche, everybody will laugh at them, right? And they'll say, you're an ass clown, right? You probably have a small pecker, right? What's your problem, right? And when that happens, the idea of being a person that flies around in private jets and lives in 25,000 square foot houses and stuff will be socially ridiculous. Those people will never get laid, right? And so that's how we actually think that it happens, is via intergenerational change in virtues, values, and norms. Does not require any guillotines, right? Now, the short road to Game B would be if the center does not hold, and some of these earlier crash scenarios actually do occur, and they might. There are many ways that Game A could self-terminate. And when people ask me, what do I think is the most likely risk? I say, truthfully, it's that our collective sense-making seems to be falling apart. The example I talked earlier about comparing the 50% high school graduates of 1965 with the 90% high school graduates and 35% college graduates, and their ability to make good social decision making. If we continue on the road we're on, we could collapse just from literally having driven ourselves insane through our information infosphere. And if something like that occurs, or an EMP blast, a solar flare takes down the grid for 2 years, or a civil war breaks out, or a really bad pandemic. We were lucky with COVID. It was not the big one. It was the wake-up call. It killed less than 1% of people. We could easily have a pandemic at least as contagious, maybe more so than COVID-19, that killed 50% of the people. What would happen if, black plagues happen many times in human history? We could have a plague that bad, right? In those cases, game B will have to scramble and grow as much more rapidly in 25% a year. How can it grow fast enough at that point to catch all the inbound? Can it avoid being crushed by roving Mad Max mobs? I don't know, but we'll be prepared for that scenario. Game Bers will not be pacifists. Every Game B community will have its own militia and be ready to defend itself if necessary. It'll never be the aggressor, but it'll always be ready to defend itself. And so that will be a turbulent and crazy time, and we hope we don't go there, but we are thinking about it. So, to answer your question, the preferred route is the long road, slow and organic growth, culture change until being a boring rich person will be socially unacceptable, and you'll never get laid, and the tipping point will occur around 2085.
So two questions. Are preppers in the US, are they game B people?
Are whose?
Preppers, the people that
no.
anticipating the end of the world, we got to prepare.
Well, no, they're not doing anything constructive, right? Oh, in fact, that's actually a good point. I had that in my talking points, but I decided to skip over it in the interest of time. Which is another idiot manifestation of rich people, is buying doomer bunkers in New Zealand.
Yeah.
It ain't gonna work, people. If you're in New Zealand and the shit really hits the fan, the local Kiwis are just going to kill you and take your stuff, right? The only way to survive the big one is to be embedded in a substantial community of people who have skills to make it through to the other side. And that's not your prepper with his basement full of guns and his stack of MREs. He might outlast a few people, but he's not part of Game B at all. Now, Game B will have a prudential prepperism, right? I suspect that will be like the Mormons and stockpile a year's worth of food, right? For those smaller fluctuations. That doesn't get you through the big one, but it might get you through, the Black Death famine or something like that. But the prepper, no, not Game B at all. But there could be a bit of prepperism within Game B.
How do you get through to the people whose goal in life is to die rich as quickly as possible and accumulate as much coins as possible? You're talking of a completely different mind shift of understanding community, generosity, compassion, sharing. For those people that might not have that, which seems to be omnipresent at the present day. I've never seen so much a lack of empathy. How do you get them, or you just ignore them and let the crowd push them aside?
No, that's an extremely key question. And that is, no point talking to people who don't have the ears to hear, right? This is, I think St. Paul said that. Fortunately, we see that even the zillionaires with ears to hear are growing at an exponential rate.
Yeah.
And Game B is tiny. A few $1 billion would take Game B a very long way. And there are absolutely more than enough people who now have ears to hear and have major means that if they allocated 3% of their capital stack to Game B, which will not keep them from having all the toys they want, right? Game B could roar into being. And as the culture change occurs, we believe, we've been seeing the ears to hear growing from 0 in 2013, almost, to significant. I give a talk now in a place with lots of rich people, 2 or 3% of them come up and talk to me afterwards. How can I help? Right. So I'm not going to try to convince the assholes. Right. I will run some mimetic warfare here at some point. For instance, shaming people to giving up their private jets. For instance, if there's any exemplar of late stage game A gone mad, it's the private jet. I will confess, when I first became a really rich person, I did join one of those private jet clubs where you get a car.
NetJet.
Yeah, it was a different one. It's called Sentient, high tech. You didn't actually own a share, but you could order up and everything. I guess I got to tell you this story because it's just so perfect. Being a good game A motherfucker, I said, "Oh, I got to do my due diligence on these people." So I asked Sentient for 3 references after I decided they were the best deal. First guy I called was very similar to me. They made a similar amount of money and similar kinds of business. Even lived an hour's drive from me. I said, "Well, what do you think about Sentient and private jet travel?" And this was his response. He says, "It's like champagne and cocaine for breakfast. Of course you love it. The problem is, how do you not do it every day?" Right? And sure enough, being wished onto the tarmac in a limo, people to take care of your bags into the plane, fly to your destination, bags off the private jet into the limo, off to your destination. It's great. It's almost as good as cocaine and champagne for breakfast, if not quite. But it's fun to fucking mentally immoral. In 2006, I only did it once or twice a year. I realized, no, this is a trap. And not only did I refuse to do it, I refused to take rides in other people's planes. I would say if there's a symbolic issue, on the scale of things, it doesn't really matter, but it's symbolic. Say no to private jets. If you just do that, you've taken your first step.
Annegien wanted to ask, she said, one of the major issues is current lopsided possession of land and money. How do we deal with that in the transition to plan game B?
Eventually, all the land is owned by these Dunbar scale communities, right? And that we will buy it initially, and in fact, if we can grow exponentially, we'll eventually own all the land. So we see the land eventually converting from who are the 2 biggest landowners, 3 biggest landowners in America? Who's the guy who does Liberty Media? A real famous psychopath, right? Lives in Colorado, and
Bill Gates has a lot of land.
And Gates, Gates a more reasonable guy. He has a bunch of land, and Mr. Jane Fonda, Mr. X Jane Fonda, he owns a bunch, right? But eventually, Game B will own all the land. It'll just take 60 years.
And you said that you were speaking to a group of wealthy people. Maybe it happens regularly, and that you accept the fact that more than 95% don't want to hear anything you're saying, but they're still showing up, which is quite surprising. And they're listening, or maybe they will all walk out of the room, and you get through to 2 to 3%.
Well, they don't come to hear me. I go to talk at events.
Oh, okay. All right.
Where I have a captive audience.
So you have Charlize Theron coming, actually, or Matt Damon, and you're the sideshow.
Exactly. You got it.
Okay.
Yeah. So no, I could not. People don't have the ears to hear. Aren't going to come to listen to me. I can tell you that. But I can go where they are and start putting some ideas in their head. And actually, and more deeply, more seriously, where we're really seeing the energy is from the next generations, right? Not the founders, not the Buccaneers of Wall Street, but their kids and their grandkids. They're the ones that are starting to see this, and either in their own rights, those who starting to get access to significant capital, or through guilt tripping dad or granddad like crazy, right? What's more valuable to you, having yet another $25,000, 25,000 square foot house, or getting along with your kids, right? We all know the answer to that. Getting along with your kids is vastly more important. So we expect that dynamic to also be quite interesting. Particularly, it's already happening, though at a low level, but that will increase until, you know, the kids are telling dad you're an asshole for driving a Porsche and you're a mass murderer for flying in your private jet.
You're quite, at least you perceive as quite optimistic about the progression direction toward game B. You don't seem to have any doubts about it. It might just take a bit longer, but ultimately the game A is over.
Well, if you're not an optimist, so how the hell do you get out of bed every day? You know, we know this is going to be tough, right? If I was forced to put money down in a prediction marketplace on the probability of the success of game B, I don't know what I'd put down, but it wouldn't be gigantic probability. But if you aren't trying, why are you even living, right? I certainly don't think it's a sure thing, but I do think it is doable. And it's one of those interesting collective action things that if many of us believe that it is doable, then it becomes even more doable.
But how do you keep mental illness has increased dramatically, particularly since COVID and, you know, all the other horrors of the. How do you stay upbeat? You can say, yeah, you know, if you don't have your big purpose, if you're not going to, you know, throw yourself into this, what's the purpose? But it is very challenging. It's not easy to kind of stay the course.
And that's, of course, why we have to build actual game B existence, right? There's a few of us, we guess it's 1 or 2% of the population, have the right genetic roll of the dice to, you know, fight this fight without being in it. You know, if you want to get fancy and talk cognitive science, it's probably people of high openness, high conscientiousness, and very high disagreeableness, right? We don't really give a fuck what anybody thinks, right? And I've actually taken the Ocean 5-part personality test, and I fit all those parts, right? And also very low in neuroticism. So we're not attracted to bad mental health. But once you get inside a game B, this is the #1 game B thinking, which is initially game B broke apart, died, version 1.0, in a disagreement over what comes first, individual change or institutional change. And we got back together 3 years later, we realized what idiots we were, supposedly super smart people, but didn't keep us from being stupid. In reality, it's both. For everybody except for the 99% disagreeable, as much individual change as you do, you go off to some retreat, right? A friend of mine, part of our adjacent world, just went off to a 42-day retreat. Then he said when he comes back to his everyday world, sucked back into all the old patterns. You got to have the institutional scaffolding, a way of life that is continuously signaling you in a way to support your individual change and your increased human capacity. At the same time, there's limits on what institutions you can build with, say, game A to the bone people, right? Once people have made some individual change, you can build new, better institutions, which scaffold those changes. And, oh, by the way, help new changes, which help new institutions, which help more individual change, et cetera. And we see it as a spiral upward, but that only works if you build in a membrane where the currents are strong enough so that the people feel that doing the right thing is the right thing, which is not the case in game A.
And for those that want to dive in before your book is published, because you have a couple of platforms and websites which allow people to actually play game B in a kind of gamification system. Which one we can also, I'll send it out to everybody who signed up, and when we publish that, what is the best site for kind of novices who say, I want to better understand game B, other than, you know, Jim just cursing at everybody?
The Game B group on Facebook is quite large.
Okay.
I'll send you the link to that. We also have a secret online site with like 4,000 members, game-b.org. I'll send you the link to that. And it'll ask you some questions. And how did you hear about it? Just say, that motherfucker Jim Rutt sent me, and
Don't forget to write motherfucker Jim Rutt, otherwise he won't get it
yeah,
accepted.
the gate wardens will let you in if you just say that you heard me give a talk or something, right? And those are two places for some of the written materials. There's less and less written materials, unfortunately. A lot more of it these days is in video form, which is why I'm writing the book. There's a wiki, GameB.wiki, which has a lot of pointers and bios of the people involved. It's a bit obsolete currently, it needs to be updated, but it's also an easy place to start if you just want to browse.
I had introduced you to the new CEO of Omidyar, they're revamping. He was quite keen to chat with you because he does remember about the support they did. So you might want to take the time because they're looking to fund projects like this. They're not looking for 10x returns at all, maybe not any returns at all. So you should follow through on that with Mike from Omidyar.
I'm glad you reminded me of that. It's been on my list of things to do for several days, and he only lives a few hours from 3-hour drive from us.
Yeah, it's possible he's close to you, and a very civilized guy. And they've kind of revamped. They've shut down Omidyar in India, and they're working with I think 3 or 4 major endowments to create a new vehicle. He's calling it about non-financial return governance, new structures for governance, and how to deal with AI and stuff. So I would definitely reach out. What specifically can those that are watching this live and those that will watch the replay, what can we do to help you in the short term?
Yeah, if you're interested, send me an email.
Okay.
You can share. Feel free to share my email.
I'll share your email with everyone.
I'm sort of one of my roles is talent scout and connector behind the scenes. People say, "What's your role in Game B?" Well, Game B it has no legal entity, it has no titles, has no roles. But when forced to say, I say I'm the head janitor, right? I keep the online systems running. I basically by recruiting volunteers to run them. I don't do it myself. I connect people. Basically do all the ash and trash, and so just have them raise their hands, and I'll figure out who they should be talking to.
And do you have modules or organizations engage in Game B based in Asia or Europe or outside of North America?
Oh yeah, 50%.
Oh really?
Is outside of North America. Nothing much. There are some people in India, but there's no real activity in India yet. But there are a few people in India. But yeah, I would say Game B is slightly overrepresented in Australia, New Zealand, and Northern Europe, particularly Sweden, per capita relative to the U.S., and is very strong in Germany, Switzerland, UK, and Ireland, and Spain and Portugal. Oddly, no penetration at all in France. I don't know why.
Yeah.
Any French people, give me a call. I'd love to get a foothold in France.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we have a very big network. We have about 50,000 subscribers to the weekly. One other thing, you were looking at a presentation and people were asking, wow, these are, an avalanche of data. Is there a source of a lot of the data that you pushed out there, or do you have a PDF of the statistics that you were presenting in the, let's say, 40-minute presentation?
No.
Okay. All right. So it's just a presentation that they're using, and that will be coming in your book.
Yeah. And where have I pulled that? Anyway, I'll see what I've got. If I have something that looks useful, I'll send it to you.
Thank you. That would be really, really helpful. Any final comments? I like the fact that, you're not letting the horrors of the universe bother you. You're not like the guy in the Green Mile who takes on all of the horrors of the world, big African American. And it doesn't bother you that you're not getting through to the majority.
Yep, just the way it is. A genetic roll of dice. But I would also say that there is a huge amount of bad attractors about bad thinking. Avoid all that doomer stuff and say, yeah, they ain't party, but the only way we're going to get through this is forward. That's about all I can say about that. But the sooner you get part of a Game B community of other people who think the same way, and less of, oh dear, oh my, my co-author and I started writing the book. We were saying what we don't want to do is do what most people do, which is 80% of the book, the litany of shit, and then 20% hand waving, weak ass, how we're going to fix this. Our book will have 1 page about the litany of shit and a pointer to the website, and 379 pages of how do we get there?
And how do you determine who's willing to listen? In the first, you don't know. I mean, some people might, hey, I never thought about that, Jim. Thanks.
Yeah, you continually ping, right? And then echoes come back from some percentage of the people. We'll use social media. People give talks like this one. I don't do a lot of talks at this current times. I'm so head down in the book, but and there are many people that are far more visible than I am. People like Daniel Schmachtenberger, Jordan Hall, though he's also kind of introspectively getting right. Bonita Roy, Greg Henriques, John Vervaeke, McGilchrist, etc. There are many people out there pinging it, not necessarily pure Game B, but even Brett Weinstein sometimes, right? He was one of the co-founders.
Do you have any traction in India? I'm curious.
As I said, a few listeners, but nothing happening on the ground.
Okay. All right. This has been an utter joy. I'm very, very grateful for your time and also your passion and commitment, because it's not about cutting ribbons. It's actually about grabbing the shovel and doing the work. So thank you for that. And if there's anything that we can do to help, do follow up with Mike from Omidyar. He was keen to catch up with you. So maybe that's a good opening. And this replay will be available and we'll distribute to a very large group so that they hear what you're saying. And hopefully that 2 or 3% becomes a larger group.
That would be wonderful. Thank you for the opportunity. I'm always willing to chat with people who have ears to hear. And as we talked about, I will also, when the link's available, share it out on our networks. That will probably bring another 30 to 50,000 viewers to it. So thanks for the opportunity. Let's see where we go from here to save the world.
Yeah, and let's not forget it's farming, not hunting. Stay well, Jim. And thank you all for joining. Be good. Good luck with staying safe and sane. Bye-bye.
Always good thought. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.